We had a Radio Shack computer, and we ended up numbering everything, punch it up on the computer, tell me what was on it.
Known as the happiest guitar hero to ever hit the stage, Eddie Van Halen lit up the rock world for decades with those wild solos, that goofy grin, and a smile that could light up an arena. But behind that famous smirk, Eddie was carrying something darker, something that shocked even his closest friends. At 62, he finally dropped the bomb. He had a list, a private blacklist of 6 legendary guitarists the world thought he admired, but deep down, he couldn't stand. These weren't random names either. These were his idols, his jam buddies, the very same people who helped shape his sound. But somewhere along the way, they burned him, dismissed him, or broke his trust in ways he never forgot. And once this list surfaced, the rock world completely lost it, because nobody expected these names. Eric Clapton, the hero who shattered Eddie's heart. That's right, the first name on Eddie Van Halen's secret hate list was none other than Eric Clapton, the one guitarist Eddie once worshipped like a god. He didn't just listen to Clapton, he studied him. Back in the day, his friends said you couldn't walk into Eddie's room without hearing Cream blasting through the speakers so loud the walls shook. Crossroads was on repeat night after night until the record was nearly worn out. To Eddie, Clapton wasn't just an inspiration. He was everything. Every bend, every solo, every tone. Eddie built his early sound straight from Clapton's blueprint. But in 1980, that admiration came crashing down. During an interview, a reporter asked Clapton what he thought about Eddie's playing. Clapton could have been humble, even supportive. Instead, he gave a cold response that hit Eddie like a punch to the gut. He's very good technically, but I don't hear much soul. When Eddie read that, he didn't explode in anger. He just went quiet. His friends said they'd never seen him look so crushed. He told one of them, "I learned everything from him," and he says that single line stuck in his head for years. But the real heartbreak didn't come from words. It came face to face. Later that year in Los Angeles, Eddie finally got to meet his hero. He was nervous but thrilled, like a kid about to meet Santa Claus. But the moment they shook hands, something felt off. Clapton barely looked up. No smile, no warmth, just a few polite nods and quick glances at his watch, like he couldn't wait for it to end. When Eddie walked away, he sighed, "I think he just wanted it to end." That moment cut deep. His hero, the man he'd worshipped for years, had treated him like a stranger. Years later, Eddie finally admitted the truth to a close friend. "I loved the myth more than the man." And that's why Eric Clapton sits right at the top of Eddie's secret blacklist. Not because of some rock star rivalry, but because that disappointment shattered something inside him. It wasn't hate born from jealousy, it was heartbreak from realizing that your biggest hero doesn't see you the same way you saw them. Richie Blackmore. The cold stare that froze Eddie in his tracks. Eddie Van Halen never forgave Richie Blackmore, and what's wild is Blackmore didn't even have to say a single word. The very first time they crossed paths, the vibe in the room turned to ice. Eddie walked in buzzing with excitement, ready to finally meet one of his heroes, another guitar god he'd looked up to for years. But the second he locked eyes with Richie, everything changed. Blackmore just stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold, and that glare screamed, "You don't belong here." Years later, Eddie still remembered that moment like it just happened. He told people, "He just stared at me, didn't say hi, nothing." That silence hit harder than any insult. Eddie was the kind of guy who made everyone feel welcome, smiling, laughing, always spreading good energy. But Blackmore? Nothing. No handshake, no nod, not even a glance of respect. It felt like a public rejection, like a pro telling the rookie to stay in his lane. And it didn't stop there. At a late 70s festival, one of the crew tried to lighten the mood and said, "You two should talk guitar tones sometime." But Blackmore didn't even fake politeness. He turned away, voice sharp and dismissive, saying, "Not now. I don't have time for that kid." Eddie heard it. Everyone around heard it. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost feel it pressing down. It wasn't just rude, it was humiliating. Then came the knockout punch. When a music mag later asked Blackmore what he thought about Eddie's insane new playing style, Blackmore smirked and said, "He's a fine player, but too many notes." That wasn't feedback. It was a straight-up diss, a way of saying, "Don't get ahead of yourself." From that day on, something in Eddie shifted. The admiration he once had turned cold. The man he'd respected became the one he avoided mentioning altogether. Years later, when asked about that tension, Eddie dropped one of his coldest lines ever. "Some people give you the shaft with their eyes. Then he added, Blackmore didn't just give it, he perfected it. Joe Perry, the rock star who acted like Eddie didn't exist. So what went down between Eddie Van Halen and Joe Perry? Before they even exchanged a single word, the air between them was thick with tension. Eddie joined the 1978 tour, hyped beyond belief. He was sharing the stage with Aerosmith, one of the bands that inspired him as a teenager. But the backstage vibe? Completely different story. Every time Eddie crossed paths with Joe Perry, Perry would just stroll past him like he was invisible. No smile, no eye contact, not even a simple, hey. It was pure silence, and it cut deep. Eddie didn't sugarcoat it. He once said, Joe Perry would just give me the shaft with his eyes. That quiet shade spoke louder than words. It wasn't some loud argument or beef. It was cold indifference, and it stung every single time. Eddie wasn't looking for praise or recognition. All he wanted was a little respect from someone he'd looked up to for years. But Joe, he gave him nothing but distance. The coldest moment came one night after soundcheck. Eddie spotted Perry holding a stunning Gibson and walked over with that trademark friendly grin, ready to talk shop. But before Eddie could even say a word, Perry lifted his hand, didn't even turn his head, and motioned, don't talk. Then he just kept chatting with someone else like Eddie wasn't even standing there. Eddie froze, completely stunned. For a guy who could light up any room, that kind of rejection hit hard. Later, he told a close friend, it was like I didn't even exist. That moment stuck with him for years. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it burned deeper than any public insult ever could. Years later, Joe Perry finally spoke up, calling Eddie a genius and praising his legacy. But by then, the wound had already set in. The silence, the cold looks, the way Perry acted like he wasn't even there. It was too late to fix. With Joe Perry, it wasn't about harsh words or rivalries. The pain came from the quiet, the kind of silence that echoes in your memory forever. Randy Rhoads, the rival who hit Eddie where it hurt the most. The tension between Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads didn't just quietly build, it exploded the moment Randy's name started popping up next to Eddie's in every rock magazine headline. Eddie had just reinvented guitar, playing with his wild, groundbreaking style. And suddenly here came this young, classically trained prodigy being hyped as the next Eddie Van Halen. That label hit Eddie like a slap to the face. Eddie didn't bother hiding how much it got under his skin. In one interview, his tone turned sharp when he said, he learned everything from me. To Eddie, it felt like the media was snatching his crown and handing it to someone who hadn't earned it yet. And even though Randy wasn't trying to copy him, the press wouldn't stop stirring the pot. Every magazine article, every fan argument turned it into a duel of the decade. Their styles couldn't have been more opposite. Eddie was chaos and feel, pure instinct, raw emotion, and total unpredictability. Randy, on the other hand, was tight precision, trained, calculated, and perfectly executed. But none of that mattered to the headlines. The media turned their differences into a fight, and suddenly it was all about who ruled the guitar world. Then came the moment that turned Rivalry into real anger. While on tour with Ozzy Osbourne, one of Randy's techs decided to pull a prank. He taped a tiny photo of Eddie's face under Randy's wah pedal, so every time Randy pressed down, he was literally stomping on Eddie's picture. Randy thought it was funny and left it there. The joke spread fast through the crew, and when word finally reached Eddie, something inside him snapped. In public, Eddie tried to brush it off with a laugh, acting like it didn't matter. But behind closed doors, it burned him up. To him, that wasn't just a prank, it was disrespect. That little stunt crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And Ozzy didn't help things when he later said that Randy didn't have a nice thing to say about Eddie. That rumor only poured gasoline on the fire. Eddie suddenly felt like the world he helped build was turning against him. The same industry that once called him a genius now made him feel overshadowed by a kid he thought should have been giving him credit, not competition. But the truth? Randy Rhoads hated the comparisons too. Both of them were exhausted by the constant side-by-side talk, yet pride kept them from ever showing respect out loud. Deep down, they both knew the other was brilliant, but neither wanted to say it first. And after Randy's tragic passing, that rivalry never really faded. Even years later, Randy's name still echoed in Eddie's mind, a ghost he could never completely escape. Tom Schultz, the engineer who crossed Eddie's line. The feud between Eddie Van Halen and Boston's Tom Schultz didn't start behind closed doors. It exploded right in front of a live audience. Eddie had just finished tearing through one of his signature solos, the kind that left the crowd screaming in pure chaos. But moments later, Tom Schultz stepped on stage for Boston's set, and what he played made Eddie's jaw drop. The solo sounded almost identical. Same phrasing, same energy, same tone. Everything. Eddie stood at the side of the stage, eyes wide, thinking, did he really just steal my solo? It wasn't just flattery, it felt like a straight-up copy. The crowd loved it, but Eddie was furious. When the show ended, he didn't waste a second. He marched right up to Schultz and confronted him face to face. No small talk, no smiles, just straight to the point. Why'd you play my solo out there? Why would you take something that personal? He demanded. But Schultz, he didn't even blink. He just shrugged, cool as ever, and said, it sounded good. Then he turned around and walked away like it was nothing. No apology, no explanation, just pure indifference. That one moment sealed it. For Eddie, it wasn't just about music, it was about respect. And when someone brushed off his art like it was a casual riff anyone could steal, that crossed his final line. That moment lit a fire inside Eddie like never before. It wasn't just about someone copying his style, it was the arrogance behind it. The way Tom Schultz shrugged him off, like Eddie's art, his passion, his soul, was just some riff to borrow for fun. Schultz didn't even acknowledge the tension. He acted like Eddie wasn't his equal, like talking to him was beneath him. That cut deep, way deeper than words ever could. And just when things could have cooled down, another moment made sure that grudge stuck for good. At a later festival, both of them ended up backstage again. Eddie decided to take the high road. He gave Schultz a polite nod, like a peace offering between legends. But instead of nodding back, Schultz just kept walking, didn't slow down, didn't smile, didn't say a word. Crew members even swore he purposely turned his head so he wouldn't have to make eye contact. That was it for Eddie. Game over. Eddie could handle competition. He lived for it. He respected rivalries. They pushed him to play harder, faster, louder. But disrespect, that was unforgivable. Schultz didn't just borrow a solo, he dismissed the man who created it. And that's why his name stayed locked on Eddie's secret blacklist. Not for the music, but for the cold arrogance behind it. Rick Derringer, the veteran who pushed Eddie past his limit. Rick Derringer holds a wild and not so honorable title. He's the only guitarist Eddie Van Halen ever kicked off a tour, and that alone should tell you how fast things spiraled out of control. There was no slow build-up here, no quiet rivalry, no subtle shade. This one went from respect to rage in an instant. What made it even crazier? Eddie actually liked Rick Derringer at first. He respected his career, admired his chops, and thought touring together would be fun. A meeting of two generations of guitar greatness. But that respect didn't last long once they hit the road. The energy between them flipped quick, from admiration to tension and tension to pure hostility. Eddie had grown up jamming to Derringer's records, studying his confident stage presence, even borrowing a few licks when he was young. But all that nostalgia went up in flames during one explosive night in 1978. Eddie had just finished one of his mind-blowing solos, the kind that left the entire crowd hanging on every note, jaws dropped, cameras flashing. Minutes later, Derringer walked out, and what he played made Eddie's blood boil. It wasn't just inspired by Eddie's solo. It was Eddie's solo, note for note. Same tone, same phrasing, same everything, in front of the same crowd that had just cheered for Eddie's version. Eddie stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching every second, and the look on his face said it all. He wasn't flattered, he was furious. To him, that wasn't a tribute, it was theft. After the show, Eddie didn't hold back. He pulled Derringer aside and told him straight, I don't care if people use tapping, but copying my melody, that's different. He even tried to appeal to some respect between musicians, reminding Rick that he'd looked up to him when he was younger. But Derringer? He brushed it off like it was nothing, muttering something about just giving the crowd what they liked, before walking away without even a proper reply. That hit Eddie harder than any insult could. It wasn't just the copying, it was the total lack of respect. But what happened next took things to another level. The very next night, Derringer went on stage and did it again. The exact same solo, same melody, same phrasing, same flash, like he was daring Eddie to react. And to top it off, he even ended his set with You Really Got Me, Van Halen's signature anthem, the song that had launched Eddie into stardom in the first place. That moment was the final straw. Eddie didn't shout, didn't start a scene. He just made the call with total calm, but deadly finality. He looked at the band and crew and said, Derringer's not opening for us anymore. That was it. No debate, no discussion, no second chances. Rick Derringer had crossed the line not once, but twice, and Eddie wasn't about to let it slide a third time. He shut that door and locked it for good. That move sent a clear message across the entire rock scene. Eddie Van Halen didn't play games when it came to respect. He could forgive mistakes. He could even laugh off rivalries. But if you disrespected his craft, his sound, or his stage, you were done. And now that Eddie's secret blacklist has finally come to light, those 6 names that lived rent-free in his mind for years: Eric Clapton, Richie Blackmore, Joe Perry, Randy Rhoads, Tom Schultz, and Rick Derringer. Which one caught you off guard the most? These weren't just any names. They were icons. Legends Eddie once idolized before things turned sour and the heartbreak set in. It's wild to think how each of these moments, those icy stares, silent brush-offs, stolen solos, and cruel comments, helped shape the man behind the guitar. Beneath all that charm and talent, Eddie carried scars from the very people he once admired most. So now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear which part shocked you the most and why. And hey, if you love uncovering these raw, behind-the-scenes rock stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell too, because the next revelation might just be even crazier than this one. See you in the next video.